Hello, my name is Benedict Beckeld, and I'd like to take a few minutes to speak about causality and why it's so important for understanding everyday situations. For example, the purported rape culture we have here in America. This is something I've written a little bit about in the past, but it's such an important issue that I'd like to make a video as well. Now, the first thing to understand about causality is that there are many different types of causes, and that any given event has a multitude of causes behind it. It's impossible, unfortunately, for any human being to survey the entire network of causality that is behind any event, but it is our task as philosophers, and I think as practical human beings, to try to see as many of the causes as possible that produce an event. Now, already in antiquity, philosophers argued with each other about what kinds of causes there are, such as, for example, the Stoic philosopher Chrysippus and the late Peripatetic philosopher Alexander of Aphrodisias. Although philosophers may have disagreed with each other about the details, it is clear nonetheless that there are more than one kind of cause. Some adjectives or categories that we can use for convenience sake to describe some of these causes are, for example, proximate, distant, immediate, initial, external, internal, indirect, direct, predisposing, necessary, sufficient, main, assisting or contributing, active, and passive causes. One cause can be several of these things at once, but it can't, of course, be all of them. Now, a famous example that was used by philosophers, especially in antiquity, to describe how these different kinds of causes can come together to produce an event was the famous Greek myth of Oedipus, and when he killed his father Laius, or the man who he later found out was his father, Laius. When Oedipus and Laius meet on the road, the cause of Laius's death isn't only Oedipus's decision to kill him, which is an immediate and internal cause, as it comes from Oedipus's own inner decision. But we have also, for example, the fact that Oedipus happens to have a weapon with him, which is an assisting or contributing cause. Because if Oedipus hadn't had a weapon, even if he wanted to kill him, Laius might have lived. Even earlier, we have Laius's decision to get rid of his infant son Oedipus out of fear of the prophecy that his son is one day going to kill him. And so that is a more distant and, to some extent, an initiating cause. Now that this has been established, we are ready to apply this knowledge to our own real current world. A potentially fatal mistake that people make is that they confuse causality with blame. Somebody thought himself clever by putting up the following pie chart or some version of it on social media. It suggests that only rapists are the cause of rape, but as any philosopher knows, this is, in one word, nonsense. It is undeniably the case that immodest behavior and the excessive consumption of alcohol can be and have been contributing causes to many rapes. This does not mean, however, that it is the victim's fault. It is perfectly possible and legitimate to discourage immodest behavior and excessive consumption of alcohol and to encourage responsibility and proper behavior, while at the same time ascribing blame only to the perpetrator if a rape does occur. But to work out of this theme would probably have made that pie chart less shared and liked on social media. Similarly, if I walk through a bad neighborhood at 2 o'clock in the morning flashing an expensive gold watch, I add a contributing cause to the event of my being robbed, and it would consequently be in my interest not to do so. Nonetheless, the fault of the robbery lies solely with those who robbed me. Unfortunately, there are some people out there who misunderstand the causes behind events and who thereby endanger themselves and others needlessly. Now, if we can all just be agreed that what we want is less rape and ultimately no rape at all, then we have to stand against that strain of popularized feminism that victimizes the very people it is supposed to elevate. This feminism, or this type of feminism, victimizes women by assuming that responsibility is tantamount to submission. These feminists say that young ladies should behave any which way they want because they believe erroneously that only rapists are the cause of rape. And once one points out to them the multitude of causes behind a rape, as behind any event, they automatically equate it to victim blaming. But the truth of the matter is that finding causes is one thing and assigning blame is another. Risk and culpability are not the same. Now, in truth, all philosophers, no matter what school they belong to, do know this, but philosophical knowledge has a remarkable inability to trickle down to the general population, and that's part of what I would like to change, at least in this particular issue. Incidentally, it could also be pointed out that the people who make this mistake regarding causality are often of the same ilk as the people who otherwise, in other contexts, try to excuse the criminal and say that he is the victim of poverty or social oppression or oppression by the rich and any number of other forces. But that when it comes to women or crimes against women, all of a sudden they completely find only the criminal to be the cause of the crime, and their philosophy becomes very self-contradictory for that very reason. But that's just an aside. In an immeasurably complex world, it is very simple-minded to believe that causality is like a straight line or like a set of dominoes with one thing leading to the next, which leads to the next, and so on. Rather, causality is like a network of crisscrossing lines. It's like a weave of trillions of threads, of which we can never see the whole thing. But as many of these threads are not active or conscious agents, we don't ascribe blame to all of the causes of an event, obviously, but only to the deliberate and active and conscious doer, namely the rapist in our example. Now, all of this is extremely important because once we have identified causes or potential causes correctly, then we can take proper countermeasures. And so those who say that one's own behavior is not a causal factor in an event, they end up putting women in harm's way. Rather, we should emphasize to both men and women that it is very important to behave responsibly. Thank you for having watched.